So the first change that you'll notice when you're creating a workflow in SharePoint Designer 2013 is that you have a choice. You have a choice of platform type. So if you have the SharePoint 2013 workflow configured and you have the service application proxy to it, you're connected, you have a connection from your SharePoint farm to the workflow manager farm, then you'll see this drop-down box with SharePoint 2013 workflow. Otherwise, you'll only be able to do SharePoint 2010 workflows. And there is also now a visual designer in SharePoint Designer 2013, in addition to the one that you normally see, which is now called the text designer. And so you can actually see shapes like you would in Visio, and that actually requires Visio 2013 Professional. And there's lots of new workflow building blocks. So there's a new concept in SharePoint Designer of stages, and it used to just be steps, and but now there's the concept of stages, which allow you to organize your workflows a little bit better. And then a huge thing that wasn't ever there before, that always forced people to use Visual Studio to do their workflows, was this supporting loops. Loops weren't supported in SharePoint Designer, now they are. And then there's also app steps if you're doing a SharePoint app. And then there's some key new actions. So you can assign a task to users. You can start a task process. And to me, I think one of the biggest ones is the ability to call an HTTP web service. So you can call a REST endpoint that returns JSON, and you'll be able to send JSON to that service and also receive it, and then be able to get the data out of it in a nice clean way. That's huge because everything is declarative, and so you can transfer your logic into a web service and then call it from SharePoint Designer. So your workflow stays pretty simple, and anything that's complicated you can just put in a web service. And the web service could be anywhere. It could be on one of your IIS web servers, could be anything, any kind of web service. Doesn't matter what platform it is, as long as you can reach it. So there's three types of workflows in SharePoint Designer. There's list workflow, which is designed for a specific list, and that includes libraries. Libraries are lists, and it's associated with that particular list. And you can't use that on other sites and lists. So it's only that workflow will only work on that particular list that you designated when you create the workflow. And then there's a reusable workflow. This is a little bit different than before. The reusable workflow used to be able to choose your content type, and this has changed a little bit now. So now it applies to all content types, and really what it means is it applies to the item content type, which is 0x1. So you do have access to the fields that are on the item content type, like ID and title and modified by, created, etc. And you're available to associate that with all compatible lists and content types, because everything derives from that root content type. Obviously, any of these workflows that you do in SharePoint Designer can be exported now, and they get exported. You save it as a template, and the template is a WSP solution package that you can import with Visual Studio, and then do other things with it inside of Visual Studio. And then there's also the site workflow. So the site workflow is not attached to any particular list or library or content type. It's just for the particular site. So maybe there's a workflow you want to run to create some lists on your site, or do something like that. And again, it's independent of any list item or document. And then these are the options. These really haven't changed. You can make it manual. So if you have manage lists permission, then you can go in and manually start the workflow. Or you can set it when an item is added or when an item is changed for list workflows. So what we're going to do now is just use SharePoint Designer just to create a really simple SharePoint 2013 workflow. Okay, we're back on our SharePoint site now, and what we're going to do is use SharePoint Designer just to make a really simple workflow, and we will make it on the site pages list. So what I'm going to do is Open up Sharepoint Designer. Open up our test site collection. And go to workflows. I have some that are already here. Just don't pay attention to those now, but we're going to create a new list workflow. And we will create it on the site pages library. And we will call it, let's see. Let's just call it simple test. And notice how we have a choice here on the platform type. Because I've installed the Workflow Manager 1.0 and I've associated it to the SharePoint farm, this shows up. So we choose SharePoint 2013 Workflow. And notice how it automatically gives us a stage. So we can have stages, steps, and then you can have actions in the stages. So you can organize this any way you want. You can rename this stage. So stages are kind of nice. I kind of think of stages like, kind of reminds me of like object-oriented programming. You know, you organize all your classes and methods and everything. This kind of gives you a way to do that. You can organize your parts of your workflow in the different stages. You know, maybe kind of like a pipeline. You know, if you're like doing e-commerce, you know, like an order pipeline. You know, you're processing the order, you're calculating the tax, you're determining if there's a discount, all those different things you can put into different stages. I mean, I used to use Commerce Server a long time ago when it first came out, and they used to have, actually there's Site Server before that, used to have these pipeline stages that we would use, and it's kind of like that. They even call them stages here, so it's kind of interesting. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to add an action here, and we will log to the history list. That's all we're going to do. And we'll log a message. I have something on the clipboard. So I'll say the title is, and then I can use, so this is the nice part of SharePoint Designer. I have really nice lookups here. So I want to grab the current item. So that's the current item that we're running this workflow on in the list, which is site pages. And the field, we'll go ahead and grab the title. There it is. Return a string. Say OK. And then you always have, when you're done with a stage, you need to transition to a stage. But we're done here, so I'm going to go to a stage. And I click stage, and the stage, there's only one stage here. I'm not going to go back to that. So I want the stage, other default stage is called end of workflow. So I'm going to go to end of workflow to just end this workflow. So now I'm going to save this. And then I'll go ahead and publish it. Okay. We'll do a save as template here if we wanted to. It saves it in the site assets library. And so it just saves it as a WSP file. I'm not going to use that, but that's nice how it just saves it to the site assets library instead of, you know, so you can just keep them there as kind of like your little repository. Okay, so let's go to the site and test this out, see if it works. So let's go to site contents. We'll go to the site pages library. And first of all, let's see. So I have a test page here. Let's see if this has a title. So let's view the properties on it. It has a name, so let's edit the properties. You know what I think I want to do is I want to use the documents library because it's just a little bit easier to put in the title. So we'll just do that. Let me back into SharePoint Designer. We'll just delete this. Get rid of that. Create a new one. Same thing. these documents. Logged history list. Put in the title. Say OK. Save that. Go to a stage. Stage is end of workflow. Save it and we'll publish it. Okay, back to the site. Let's just check this site pages and make sure that there's no workflows associated with it. There's none. Okay, so that's good. So we cleared that. So we'll go back to documents. Check the workflows here. Yep, our workflow is associated. So then what we'll do is we'll go to the view the properties on this. Make sure, I believe I've already set this to have a title. We'll save that title. And right now this is just set to be manually run, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the workflows, UCB, and then I can start this workflow right now. And it's going to run pretty quickly. And if I refresh this, I should see, actually we're not going to see anything. What we can do though is we can go into the workflows, and you can see that it's completed here. If I click this, and you can see here it's showing fired, the title is REST URL. So it got fired, that's the work. So we wrote to the history. So that's all we did there was wrote to history. And notice how the status got changed to completed. It didn't happen right away. So if we go back here, notice how this is, now we have a link back to stage 1. That wasn't there before. So the reason why that wasn't there before is because this is happening in a separate process. So what we can do, what I would like to do, let's go back to this document and let's change the title. Let's add the word test to it. Okay, I'm going to fire at Fiddler. If I can find it. There it is. The reason why I'm firing at Fiddler is I want to see the web service calls that get made when this workflow is run. So I'm going to go back to workflows. And I'm not going to run it yet. I'm going to clear this out, clear all this garbage out. We don't need this stuff there. So make sure it's nice and clean. Come back here, we'll run the workflow. Close this. Actually, probably shouldn't have done that. Capture that traffic. So you can see what's happening here. Let me bring this over here. So here's a this is a post to resolve the current user, which is me. And then here's the see if we can look at this request here. So it's calling get by ID on the ID that we're running the workflow on. Having some problems here with Fiddler. Doesn't want to move. So here's the call to get by ID. It's passing the unique ID of that. Actually, it's getting the list. So here, the JSON or the raw data coming back. That's a 204. Let's look at the 200. So here's a call to get, it's using REST with OData. So it's getting the list by the ID and then calling items, get the first item, and it's returning, this is the item that we were running the workflow on down here, so the JSON coming back. And then this is returning data about the list. I think we might have missed a few web calls. So this is the call from Workflow Manager back into SharePoint, and it's actually, this is actually writing to the history log, but it's writing to it via the web service. So it's calling the web services API in SharePoint. So if we look at the raw, you can see here it's doing a post to our SharePoint server to the workflow history list, and this is, it's sending in JSON. The JSON is just sending, it's a history list item, and here's the description, the GUID, user ID, workflow instance, workflow association. So what happens when SharePoint contacts Workflow Manager and gives it the hooks to call it back, and then when Workflow Manager calls back, it knows the GUID, it knows the list and the GUID that it needs to talk to, and so it SharePoint sends it the metadata to Workflow Manager, and then Workflow Manager uses that metadata to call back into SharePoint using web services. So it's totally decoupled. So that's the simple part of how the workflows work with Workflow Manager, and you can see how easy it is to design these workflows with SharePoint Designer 2013. Okay, so one of the first elements of a designer workflow is the association form. That's the form that can be used to set up the workflow. And then you can also have an initiation form. So this can be used to collect data when a workflow starts. And then steps are a way of grouping conditions and actions. We saw stages. You can group conditions and actions in stages as well. But what I like to do is group the steps inside my stage. And then conditions are just logical comparisons. And then you can have like an if-else then condition, so chained conditions. You can have parallel blocks, so the items that are going to be running in parallel. And actions perform the operations. So like maybe you want to read a list item, or update a list item, or delete a list item. Those are actions. And variables are important because we need to be able to retain state from the different forms and actions. So if a user fills something out, we want to capture the data from that form into variables. Or let's say, for example, we need to read a list item in one of our actions. We need to pull certain fields from that list item to be used later, so we store those in variables. That way we can use those later on to do something meaningful. Maybe we're going to update another list with data from the list, the current item, something like that. Stages, loops, and steps. So stages, again, like I was saying before, they're almost like object-oriented programming, a way of organizing your workflow. I really like the concept of stages. You have to be careful with them, though, because the names that you choose for stages show up in this as a status message for the workflow fields in lists and libraries. So as you saw in the workflow we did right there, you saw a field with the same name as our workflow, but then hyperlinked was hyperlinked to the stage that we had. So you need to pick meaningful names for the stages. That way it's really convenient, actually. When somebody looks at the list item and they see the workflow field, they'll know exactly what stage the workflow is in. Because before, you'd always see, like, I believe it was pending, or I believe that's what it was. It was pending or something like that. Now you can actually see what stage the workflow's made it to. So if you have a complex workflow, that's a good thing. Maybe you have like 10 stages. If maybe you're processing like it's like an order processing pipeline or something like that, where it's taking the several stages, like calculate tax, charge credit card, determine discount, that type of thing. When you look at the list item, and you see the status message, you're going to be able to tell what stage it's in, so you'll know how far along the stage pipeline has that order been processed. And this is very nice. Now we can do loops in SharePoint Designer. You used to have to do them in Visual Studio only. So this is a big help. Being able to do loops declaratively is it's a long time coming, but it's really nice that it's here now. And steps, again, you use those to organize your actions. You don't have to use them. You can put your actions inside stages too, but I like to have the steps inside of stages and then actions inside of steps. And conditions, available conditions, depend on the context. So if it's a site workflow, maybe you're comparing two different values, like if a person is a valid SharePoint user or not, or checking permission levels. Document library, maybe you're checking for created by or modified by, or looking at the file. And there's lots more. And actions are this is just a screenshot here of the list actions that are available in SharePoint Designer. There's recent actions, which is nice. So if you're using a certain action all the time, you don't have to go searching for it. It just shows up automatically. And then there's coordination actions, core actions, and list actions is what we see here. Task actions, like assigning a task to somebody, completing a task. And then utility actions. So utility actions might be something like emailing a user or something like that. So what we're going to do now is use SharePoint Designer to create a workflow that has steps and a conditional operation. Okay, in this demo we're going to be using SharePoint Designer. We're going to create a workflow that has some steps and some conditional actions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list workflow, and I'm going to go against product inventory. I'm going to call it set pricing level demo. Say OK. Now I'm going to go back to the site and show you I have a product inventory list right here. It has a product name field, state, MSRP is the price before tax. We'll use that in our workflow. And there's a price after tax field, that's blank, and then this price level field. So let me just clear that out. You can tell I've run this a few times. I'll just delete this item. Well, we'll just leave it. We'll leave it there. That's fine. Okay, so what we're going to do, our workflow is going to run the workflow on one of these items, and we're going to look at the price, and we're going to determine if the price is over a certain level. We're going to say if it's either high or low. So this price level is a choice field. It has either high or low. So let's go back into SharePoint Designer. First stage, we're going to get the price of the product. So I'm going to create a local variable. I'll call it price. And so our action, let's have some recent actions here. So I'm going to set a workflow variable. So I'm going to set price, and that's going to be equal to the current item, and the field we'll use is the MSRP field. Save that off. Now we'll add another stage here. And we'll call this set level. So what we'll do is we'll use a condition here. So if the value, in this case the value we want is the price, so it's a workflow variable, we'll choose price. And we don't want equals, we want it's greater than, and we'll say if it's greater than 300. If it's greater than $300, then we're going to set the workflow variable. First of all, we need to create another variable. So we'll create a variable called level. That's a string. So we'll set that level to high. And I'm going to add an else branch to my condition. And else I'm going to set a variable again. So I'll just set the level variable again to low. We'll save this out. Now, one thing we haven't done yet is we haven't transitioned to stage. So we know we need to get from get price to set level. So I'm going to go to action, go to a stage. The stage is set level. Save that. Now I want to add a new stage, and I'll call this one update item. And here we'll just do update list item. So we'll update the current item, and we're going to set the price level field equal to our level. Whoops, we need to do a lookup to our level variable. So here's our variable level right here. Turn it as a string. That looks good. Save that. And then I'm going to save this. I'll just add another step saying, oops, I did not want to do that. Delete that. So this one, item updated, not going to do anything. Go to a stage, we'll go to end of workflow. This one we need to also go to the stage, we need to go to update the item. So we'll save that. Check for errors. Oh, okay, so we can't, I forgot that I can't do that. So let me delete this. I'll delete this stage here. And I'll just go to the end of the workflow here. Oops, don't want to do that. Update item, so where that one needs to go to. This one needs to go to end of workflow. Save that. So let's look at our workflow again. So we're getting the price, we're going to set the level, then we're going to update the item, and then we're done. So let's check for errors. Looks good there, so let's go ahead and publish that out. Actually, I want to change this. I don't want that to say complete there. I want that to be on the update item. Save. Check for errors again. Good. We'll republish that. Okay, let's go back out to our list. Let's refresh it. And so if I run the workflow on this, it should say low. If I run the workflow on this, since it's over $300, it should say high. So let's run on this one. Let's go to workflows, set the pricing level, And so we don't see anything yet, but that's okay. We'll just click here and see it took it a little while because it's calling web services back and forth, so it's out of band. But now we know where it's at. It just finished the update item stage complete. So that's the title of the stage that we gave it. So if we click here, you'll see there's no history. We didn't have any history, but at least we can see the status of that it was completed, what time it was last run. So we'll come back here, and you can see it set the price level to high, which is correct, and we'll just run on this one too. And I should say low on that one. So it's not ready yet, but if I refresh the list, that one's done too. So you can see here how easy it is to do conditional workflows in SharePoint Designer, how to use stages and how to end your workflow. It's really a nice user experience.